For 47 years, my job was to arrive after the disaster. As a family law attorney, I didn't build things. I sorted through the wreckage of what was left behind. My office was a quiet place where good people came to tell me how their lives had been torn apart. I listened to over 3,000 stories, and I promised every single one of those people that their secrets were safe with me. A lawyer's silence is a sacred vow. But I am 91 years old now, and I've come to understand that some vows, when kept for too long, become a form of complicity. There are truths I've kept locked away that are more dangerous in silence than they are in the open. The ghosts of my clients still sit with me in this quiet study, and they are not resting. They are waiting for me to settle a debt, and that is why I am talking to you today. This is not legal advice. This is a warning. I live alone now, in this house filled with books and memories. Most days are the same. I sit in this old leather armchair, the same one where I heard so many of those stories, and I read the news. For decades, I was a passive observer, bound by my professional code. But the headlines I see now, the stories of romance scams, of good people being bled dry by predators, they feel different. They feel like an echo of the confessions I heard behind closed doors for nearly half a century. I've realized that my silence no longer protects the vulnerable. It protects the predators who hunt them. The patterns are the same, the tactics are identical, and the devastation is absolute. I am not a lawyer anymore. I am a witness, and what I witnessed cannot be allowed to happen to you. I have to tell you what I know, not for my sake, but for the sake of your peace, your security, and your final years on this earth. My days have a rhythm now, a quiet cadence measured in the slow ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My world has shrunk to the size of this study, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with the spines of 1,000 books. I begin each morning in this worn leather armchair, the same one that held the weight of so much sorrow for nearly 5 decades. There's a glass of water on the table beside me, always, and the air carries the faint, dry scent of old paper and aging leather, the smell of settled histories. But there is no peace here. The silence is deceptive. It's crowded with the ghosts of my clients, their voices etched into the very grain of this desk. I am not truly alone. I am the custodian of 3,000 endings, the keeper of secrets that have grown heavier with each passing year. My body is old and slow, but my mind is a library of tragedies, and the doors to that library have been locked for far too long. This quiet life is not a retirement. It is a long, slow haunting. It was the morning paper that finally broke the dam of my silence. For years, I read the headlines with a professional detachment, a sad but distant acknowledgement of the world's troubles. But recently, the stories began to change, or perhaps I did. I started seeing them not as news, but as echoes. An article about a widow in another state losing her home, a small piece on a retired man bankrupted by a new love. These weren't just stories anymore. They were Deborah's story. They were Michael's story. They were the same methodical patterns of destruction I had documented in my case files, files now gathering dust in the attic. My old briefcase sits in the corner, its leather softened and cracked from the sheer volume of pain it once carried. I looked at it one morning and realized my vow of silence wasn't protecting the vulnerable people I served. It was protecting the very predators who hunted them. My inaction had become complicity. That was the moment a retired lawyer died and a witness decided he had to speak. Of the 3,000 stories that found their way into the quiet of my study, one has haunted me for 30 years. It wasn't the most legally complex case, nor did it involve the greatest sum of money. It was the story of Deborah. She was what you would call a comfortable widow. When her husband passed after 40 years of a good, solid marriage, he left her secure. She owned her home outright, the one they'd built their lives in, and had a pension that allowed her a quiet, dignified life. She wasn't lonely in a desperate way. She was grieving, which is an entirely different state of being. Grief is a private room, and for a time, she was content to sit within its walls. She came to my office initially just to put her affairs in order, a sensible step. She sat in this very chair, a woman of quiet strength and gentle habits, with no idea that the foundation of her entire world was about to be systematically dismantled by a man who saw her grief not as a wound to be respected, but as a doorway to be unlocked. The man found her where predators so often find their prey, in a place of trust. It was a grief support group at the local church, a place she went not for romance, but for a little human connection, a shared understanding of loss. He was charming, of course. They always are. He was attentive, remembering the smallest details she'd mentioned. He didn't rush. The predator's greatest tool is patience. He listened to her stories about her late husband for hours, making her feel seen and her history feel honored. He started with small gestures. He'd bring her flowers, but not just any flowers. He'd bring her clippings from the rose bushes in her own garden, the ones her husband had planted. It was a gesture that said, "I see you, I see your world, I want to be a part of it." He wasn't trying to replace her husband. He was positioning himself as the respectful, gentle successor to her heart's affection. It was a masterful performance, and she, a good and trusting person, had no reason to believe it was anything but real. The isolation began slowly, like a fog rolling in. First, he'd create small wedges between her and her children, suggesting they were just worried about their inheritance, planting seeds of doubt that her own family didn't trust her judgment. He'd frame it as a form of protection. It was him and her against a world that didn't understand their special connection. Then came the money. It never started with a demand. It began as a shared problem, a we problem, a brilliant investment opportunity that had a small hiccup, a temporary business loan he needed to secure a big contract that would set them up for life. Each request was wrapped in the language of a shared future. Giving him the money felt, to her, like an act of partnership, of building something new together. She wasn't being swindled, she was investing in their love. He drained her savings, then convinced her to take a mortgage out on her home, the home that was her bedrock, her sanctuary. He was an architect of ruin, disguised as a builder of dreams. By the time she returned to my office, it was over. All of it. The man was gone, the money was gone, and the bank was preparing to foreclose on her home. But what I remember most vividly from that day was not her tears. There were none. She sat perfectly still in this chair, her hands folded in her lap, and she looked hollow. The money was a terrible loss, but the true theft was her dignity. She was consumed by a shame so profound it had burned away everything else. She felt foolish, old, and naive. She blamed herself for every decision, for every dollar, for every moment she chose to believe him. That look in her eyes, that quiet, bottomless well of shame, is the reason I am speaking to you now. I saw in that moment that the law could document her ruin, but it could not restore her peace. Her story became the ghost that never left my side, a silent, constant reminder that my professional silence was no longer a virtue. It was a debt I had to repay. You might think Deborah's story is an outlier, a tragedy that happens only to the gentle and the trusting. That is a dangerous assumption. Years later, a man named Michael sat in that same chair. He was a retired police captain, a man who had spent his life looking for the lie in people's eyes. He was tough, practical, and unsentimental. But his wife of 50 years had recently passed, and he was adrift in a sea of small, unfamiliar tasks. He confessed to me with a quiet frustration that he didn't even know how to work the new washing machine she'd bought. He wasn't looking for love. He was just trying to keep his head above water in a house that was suddenly too quiet. He met a woman at a local bar, a place he'd started going to just to be around the noise of other people. She was lively, laughed at his old stories, and made him feel like the man he used to be. She didn't see a grieving widower. She saw a captain. And for Michael, that was everything. Her strategy was different, but the blueprint was identical. She didn't prey on his grief. She preyed on his pride. She admired his strength, his past, his decisiveness. She made him feel needed, not as a companion, but as a partner. They weren't building a life of quiet comfort. They were building an empire. She had a foolproof plan to flip houses, and all she needed was an investor with his experience and grit. She made him feel like he was back in command, making the tough calls. Every check he wrote was a strategic decision, an investment in their shared, powerful future. She isolated him by dismissing his children's concerns as weakness, telling him they didn't have his vision or his courage. He wasn't losing a home, he was leveraging an asset. He wasn't draining his retirement, he was funding a legacy. By the time the illusion shattered, he had lost the house his own father had built with his bare hands. He wasn't just broke, he was a fool in his own story, a captain who had steered his own ship directly into the rocks. I sat in this study, holding two case files, separated by a decade, and I saw the same ghost staring back at me from both. A gentle widow and a hardened cop, dismantled by the same invisible architecture of ruin. They both lost their money, yes, but that was the shallowest wound. What was truly stolen was their past. The predator doesn't just take your future, they rewrite your history, making you feel like your entire life of sensible decisions was a prelude to one final, catastrophic act of foolishness. This is the core of their cruelty. They leave you in a prison of shame, a cell where you are both the inmate and the guard, replaying your mistakes on an endless loop. I could file the legal paperwork, I could document the theft, but I could not give them back their dignity. I couldn't erase the look in their eyes that said, "How could I have let this happen?" And I began to understand that my job wasn't just to sort through the wreckage. It was to find a way to stop the ships from wrecking in the first place. It was late one night, surrounded by the ghosts in this study, that I finally saw it. I had Deborah's file open on my left and Michael's on my right, and the space between them collapsed. It wasn't two stories, it was one story told twice, a meticulous and repeatable formula for dismantling a human soul. The details were different: a grief group versus a bar, flowers from a garden versus a business plan. But the architecture was identical. Isolate the target from their support system, create a shared future that requires their financial investment, frame their caution as a lack of faith, and most importantly, attack their core emotional need: Deborah's need for gentle companionship, Michael's need for respect and command. The predator doesn't just guess what you need, they study you like a textbook. They find the empty space inside you, the one left by loss or time, and they build their entire strategy around filling it. It's not a romance, it's a siege. There is a clinical name for this strategy, a term that sounds almost too gentle for the devastation it causes: love bombing. It is not a whirlwind romance. It is a calculated campaign of overwhelming attention. It's the constant texts, the endless compliments, the mirroring of your deepest hopes and dreams, the immediate talk of a shared future. It's a flood designed to overwhelm your emotional defenses before your rational mind has a chance to ask questions. It moves at a speed that feels exhilarating but is, in fact, unnatural. Real connection, the kind that lasts, is built slowly, brick by brick. Love bombing is a stage set, constructed overnight to look like a fortress. Its sole purpose is to make you dependent on the intensity of the affection, to make a normal pace of life feel dull and empty by comparison. It is the most effective weapon in the predator's arsenal because it feels like a gift. And here is the cold, hard truth that I wish I could have explained to every one of those clients. The human brain processes that kind of intense, targeted romantic attention in the exact same way it processes an addictive substance, like cocaine. The reward centers of your brain light up. You get a rush of dopamine that is powerful and intoxicating. The predator knows this. They are not trying to make you fall in love with them. They are trying to make you addicted to the feeling they provide. Once that addiction is established, they can start to withdraw it, using the threat of its absence to control you. Your rational mind, your lifetime of good judgment, your children's warnings, none of it stands a chance against the raw, primal fear of losing that feeling. You are no longer making a choice about a person. You are a hostage to your own brain chemistry. That realization changed everything for me. It was the moment I understood that I hadn't just been a lawyer documenting financial ruin, I had been a witness to a series of sophisticated psychological hijackings. And my silence, my adherence to a code that protected the privacy of these stories, felt like a betrayal. I could see the pattern so clearly, like a schematic laid out on my desk. I saw how it could be stopped, not in a courtroom after the damage was done, but in the first conversation, the first coincidence, the first compliment that felt just a little too perfect. My vow of silence was no longer a professional obligation, it was a moral failure. And in that moment, sitting alone in the quiet of this house, I knew my final case wasn't in the past. It was right now. It was for you. My job was no longer to sort through the wreckage. It was to teach you how to see the storm coming. So I sit here now, not as a haunted old man, but as a cartographer of ruin. For years I saw these stories as individual tragedies, isolated islands of pain. Now I see the entire archipelago, the hidden connections, the predictable currents that carry good people to their doom. The weight of those 3,000 secrets has not vanished, but it has transformed. It is no longer a burden of memory, it is an arsenal of knowledge. The ghosts in this room are no longer waiting for me to settle a debt of silence. They are standing with me, their stories forming the foundation of this final warning. My professional vow was to protect the client, and I have come to understand that my duty did not end when their cases were closed. My final responsibility is to take these private tragedies and forge them into a public shield, a lesson that can protect you from the wreckage I spent a lifetime sorting through. This is not a betrayal of my past. It is its ultimate fulfillment. This brings me to the hardest truth I have to share, a truth that goes against every romantic story we've ever been told. Being alone is not the worst thing that can happen to you in your later years. It is not a failure or a sign of an unlived life. Loneliness is simply a state of being, a quiet room. The true tragedy is inviting a saboteur into that room because you fear its silence. Losing everything you worked a lifetime to build because you were lonely is the worst thing. Ending your days in poverty, dependent on the children you once provided for, hollowed out by a shame so deep it poisons every memory, that is a fate worse than solitude. The predator's greatest weapon is your fear of being alone. They use it to rush you, to make you feel that their attention is a lifeline. It is not. It is an anchor that will drag you to the bottom. Your peace is more valuable than their company. And so, how do you protect this peace? How do you remain open to connection without becoming vulnerable to destruction? The answer is simpler than you think. You build a wall, not around your heart, but around your life's work. You establish boundaries that are absolute and non-negotiable. And then you watch. You watch how they react. The right person, a person of genuine character and affection, will not be threatened by your caution. They will respect it. They will understand your need to protect yourself, to consult your family, to keep your finances separate. They will see your wisdom as a strength, not as an insult to their integrity. But the predator will be offended. They will call your prudence a lack of trust. They will pressure you, sigh with disappointment, and make you feel guilty for being careful. And in that moment, they have given you the greatest gift of all. They have revealed exactly who they are. Believe them. For 47 years, I believed my job was to sit in this chair and be a keeper of endings. I listened as the final chapters of Good Lives were read to me, filled with ruin and profound regret. I was a custodian of secrets, but I see now that was never enough. The ghosts of my clients did not stay with me simply so I could remember their pain. They stayed so I could finally give it purpose. Their tragedies, the ones that have haunted this quiet room for decades, are no longer just sad stories locked away in my memory. They are lessons. They are lighthouses, built on the very rocks where other ships have wrecked, designed to guide you safely to your own shore. I've learned that the quiet dignity of being alone is a fortress compared to the noisy, chaotic ruin of a life given away to a lie. Your peace is not a void to be filled. It is a treasure to be guarded with your life. I have no new laws to teach you, no magic words that can shield you from all harm. I only have this one final image. You have spent an entire lifetime building your house. You laid the foundation with the strength of your youth, you raised the walls with decades of your hard work, and you filled every single room with the irreplaceable memories of your life. It is your shelter, your legacy, your final harbor in this world. Do not, after all of that effort, hand the keys to a charming stranger just because they admire the flowers in your garden and promise to fix a loose shingle on the roof. Your desire for companionship is valid and human, but protecting what you have built is the ultimate act of self-respect. So I will leave you with this quiet question. Is the company you are keeping today worth the price of your entire home tomorrow?